We're proud to announce CISO Stories, a new podcast series in partnership with Cybersecurity Collaborative and Cyber Reason. CISO Stories features the candid perspectives and experiences of frontline senior security executives and dives deep into timely security topics. CISO Stories is hosted by Todd Fitzgerald, VP of Cybersecurity Strategy at Cybersecurity Collaborative, and Sam Curry, Chief Product and Security Officer at Cyber Reason. Listen weekly as they speak with extraordinary CISOs by visiting securityweekly.com/CSP.
Welcome back to Security and Compliance Weekly. Hey, in case you haven't heard, Security Weekly Unlocked is going to be held in person this December 5th through 8th at the Hilton Lake Buena Vista. That's in Florida, near Disney. We are excited to announce our first round of speakers, which will include Dave Kennedy, Alyssa Miller, O'Shea Bowens, Marina, and this is where I run out of knowing the names, Chiavata, Patrick Coble, Chris Eng, Eric Escobar, Kevin Johnson, and Justin Kohler. Please forgive me if I butchered any of your names. I love all of you. Visit securityweekly.com/unlock to register and check out our lineup of speakers. And if you've missed any of our previously recorded webcasts or technical trainings, while you're at securityweekly.com, go to securityweekly.com/on-demand. You can find our whole portfolio of previously recorded sessions. All right. I was hoping to shift gears a little bit in the second segment and talk legislation, but we're talking, Supreme Court, the one branch of the government, legislative, the other branch of the government, the White House is kicking in, third branch of the government. So it all kind of blends together, and they're all staffed largely by lawyers for whatever reason.
Damn lawyers!
Lawyers. I did have one more question for you, though, before we try to shift gears a little bit. In terms of the Van Buren case, was it an issue in your opinion? I'd asked this question. We had a lawyer on episode 700 of Paul's Security Weekly, and I asked him, it was sort of a tongue-in-cheek, but it was also a serious question. Was part of the issue of the Van Buren ruling, in your opinion, Priya, that mens rea was not met?
So mens rea is a complicated thing. So the government always has to prove both parts of a crime, the actus reus, which is what you did, and the mens rea, which is what you were thinking when you did it. And it might seem impossible for someone to prove what somebody was thinking, but the government always has to do it. And they use usually circumstantial evidence. People rarely have a contemporaneous, like either yelling, "I'm doing this because I hate you and I'm doing it on purpose," or, emailing somebody, "I'm about to break in right now." So the question of mens rea is twofold here. Did he know he was doing it? He obviously knew he was doing it, right? The next question is, did he know it was unauthorized, right? And he knew it was unauthorized because, back to Josh's point, there's tons of policies, right? Your training, especially if you're in the government, especially if you're in the police, they tell you, they give you booklets. Did they have you sign it? I don't think it would have been really hard to show he knew it was unauthorized, especially given the circumstantial fact that he's getting paid to do it, right? If you thought you're allowed to do it, why are you getting money for it, right? So I don't think they had a mens rea. And then the last thing that people might think is a mens rea question is, did he know he was breaking the CFAA? You don't have to know you're breaking the law. There's sort of two types of crime. There's malum in se and then malum prohibitum. Malum prohibitum is Latin just for things. Malum means bad or evil. It's evil because I told you not to, right? This is like all parents live in a world where they're kings and queens of malum prohibitum. You tell your kid, don't sit there. It's just a crime for that kid because you told him not to do it. Malum in se is Latin for harm in and of itself, meaning this is just like rank evil stuff that we can all agree, even if we're from different places, speak different language, don't stab that person, right? Don't break into their house and take their stuff, right? So under law, you don't have to know what you're doing breaks the law. There does come down to sometimes a little slice of a question of would you have the intent? Because what you're doing is not obviously bad. It's not malum in se, it's just malum prohibitum. But I think all the other circumstances of it, especially given that this is someone who is trained on enforcement of the law and someone who's formally trained and has to, sign policies because he does get access to confidential material, I think they would have absolutely no problem proving the mens rea that he knew it was unauthorized to do it.
Yeah, I mean, it would seem to me that he took money in order to do something. That would seem to be a motivation or a something to point to and say this sort of speaks to your motivation. It seems like at the end of the day, what the Supreme Court fell down on, or where they fell in their opinion, was a very strict application of CFAA. They kind of thought, yeah, there was a crime here, but I don't think it falls under CFAA. You should have prosecuted him under different statutes, different laws, and whatnot. But you had asked the question in the first segment, what we think about the CFAA and the way it's been interpreted, to what degree it's been interpreted. Do you want to pick up on that anymore, or where would you like to go from here, Priya?
To Scott's point, and to your point of let's talk about the three branches, right? We've just talked about the judiciary, and so now let's say that Congress came to us and said, all right, legislate. You three geniuses and your, quirky lawyer friend, come up with today, July 27th, 2021, the new CFAA, right? And so, and the rules to you three, and as we draft today's CFAA, is a law has to be written in a way that it is clear, right? So that you don't just say don't do bad things, but you give people notice as to what they cannot do or what they should do, so that a reasonable person who's not a computer person understands what you're saying. And you have to also articulate what you're trying to prevent. So with those two things, we have to say what the rule is and then be able to articulate what we're trying to prevent. I ask you each to take a turn and tell me how you would write the CFAA today. So if one of you has an answer, you can start. Otherwise, I'll point to you.
So personally, I'd go after the policies first, right? The policies are what governs an organization. More oftentimes than not, when we see compliance, we see that there are policies that are missing that should be part of the compliance set, and that's found as a gap. So I would start with, are the policies, making sure that there's a set of policies that are scoped for information security, covering at least the security basics, which could be defined as the controls that are found in this CSF or RMF, and start pulling that in, right? And then the second is coming up with the technical means that an organization can use to say, yes, this is access, this is not access, right? Guys, agree, disagree, add, subtract, what's up?
Well, I'm just riffing here, but I am wondering if maybe the purpose or goal of CFAA, if we're going to rewrite it, maybe we need to start with rethinking who the intended audience is, who is it intended for.
Yes.
Yes, and it is not for computer people. It's for people like me and the Supreme Court who have devices and have no business using those devices because we don't understand how they work, right? So that's who you're writing for.
Well, maybe. I mean, that's one possibility. We're sort of, I think all three of us, even though Josh hasn't spoken yet, are thinking about this in the context of the business that we're familiar with, which is helping companies and organizations. So there's that one level, sort of the business level. And then there's, as I think Scott mentioned in the first segment, there's, we're in the business of dealing with users. And then there's the consumers who are just the lay people that are outside
Josh.
of the business. It was Josh.
Sorry, but if you remember, the CFAA is a criminal statute that applies to everybody in America, and it criminalizes certain behavior using cyber information, right? Or using computers that have access to information. So as you three sit here and you think about this country and you watch the news and you watch the various hacking and you watch things that happen in certain companies and you do deal with end users, I think the first thing to imagine is, what do you think needs to be prevented?
Okay, so let me answer your first question, and then we'll perhaps get to your second one. But I need to actually expand your question slightly, because you said what should be in the law, whatever the replacement for CFAA is, and what should it be trying to prevent, right?
Yep.
And you're now asking, you're mentioning it's a criminal statute, and my question is, who are we protecting? For example, there's multiple different compliance standards out there. I'll mention one that Jeff might know a little bit about, and that's, of course, PCI. And that protects merchants and banks and anybody involved in the credit card industry, right, Jeff? So
Close enough.
Close enough. I mean, it's for the credit card industry, the payment card industry, right? I mean, that's who it protects, but its scope is the payment card industry, okay? Yep. The scope of this is of the CFAA. We'll call it that for ease of labeling. Is a little indeterminate. Are we protecting your Joe Q public? Are we protecting company X, Y, and Z? Are we protecting government agency ABC? So it's right off the bat we've got a scoping issue, and that scoping issue is who are we protecting? Who is this law in reference to? Because we've already got laws for card brands, as Jeff mentions in Discord. We've already got laws for federal contractors, CMMC, and we've already got laws for and rules and regulations for classified information, NISPOM and various others. We've already got various laws, rules, and regulations with the force of law on a lot of different sort of arenas of information. So is this just to protect anybody that's in a hole, in a crack that's been missed before? Let's start with who is this protecting in the first place?
So
is that a good place to start?
And not just who is it protecting,
right? Because now we're playing legislature because they're sitting there going, wait, who are we trying to protect? Are we trying to protect businesses who have people hacking in and people within the business like roaming about? Are we trying to protect government institutions, right? Because this is more than just having one client, because this is, as I said, a criminal statute. So anybody who violates it could go to jail, right? And so what is the behavior out there that you all feel right now is happening that's the most dangerous, that is not covered by the CFAA as it stands today?
Well, I'm just going to pile on. Hang on, Scott. I'm going to pile on.
No, go for it.
Couple more layers. You keep bringing up that CFAA is a criminal statute. So, and based on what Josh was saying, one of the early questions that we need to figure out as legislators is whether a criminal statute is in fact appropriate or whether it should be a civil statute. And the reason why I bring that up is in most of our experiences, and we love, there's no end to breaches against companies that are reported. Very often in our industry, the organizations that are at the end of the day victims of a crime are treated as the bad guys, are embarrassed in public. They've got their names being splashed on newspapers and news sites, and we put the culpability on the organizations who failed to prevent the breach, and in turn consumer data typically is what was stolen and what was disclosed to bad guys. So I think part of our struggle is it's a criminal statute, but we mostly see played out in our little world violations of policy, violations of compliance standards, or lack of following regulatory standards and compliance standards, which result in companies getting fined and getting sanctions, which is all civil, I believe. So I'm happy to try to limit this to what should a criminal statute look like to protect citizens, but then how do you
who are we
enforce that
protecting them
when it's
from?
and it's an international problem, and then you get into the issues of attribution and
Jurisdiction.
Yeah, that's exactly what I was
Yes,
going to say. Where's the
you know
liability in
that.
this?
Sorry, I'm jumping in, but when I was thinking about this before I told you guys, because I wanted you to be on improv here, and I'm thinking about now we'll switch to the third branch, Biden, right? How's the White House doing, right, in dealing with all of these issues and trying to figure out from their point of view, what is the problem, who is the victim, whom do we need to protect, and how? It is really interesting to me, Jeff, how you just laid out the reality, which is the companies who are the victims get victim shamed and often like victim drowned, right? Because they were there and somebody out technology them, somebody committed a crime, somebody broke a policy, but it is the victim that we put in the guillotine in front of everybody. The big threats seem to be coming from international sources that we know. And I was just thinking how fascinating it is that, Van Buren, the CFAA, does this cover this? Does this cover that? Should this be a crime? Should it not be a crime for people here? But the huge threat is coming from people who are, I don't think anybody would disagree, violating us, right? In the old biblical sense, whether it's Russia, whether it's China, this is gates smashed with grenades, spies in the camp, whatever it is a trespass upon trespass upon trespass, right? And where is the criminal policy? And, we'll skip whether it's even possible to criminalize the behavior of another sovereign nation. But I agree that isn't that really, if we're going to use a criminal statute with the force of it and the threat of it, like what is Biden to do without some sort of criminal policy to fight against these international known threats who are basically committing crimes against us, but we have no crime on the book we can charge them with? Like, what do you think of this?
Well, let me add one more small item. Not that it's going to help the discussion at all, but I think we tend to lean more towards civil cases and sanctions and liability and fines and whatnot, and we go after the companies that are the victims because this criminal thing is so hard to do, and we got to do something. But just to add another wrinkle, I think one of the reasons why the collective we as an industry love to gang up on the companies that are compromised and victims of a crime, of a breach, is because too often, I won't say all of the time, but probably most of the time, the companies fall breach because they aren't fulfilling the obligations or the responsibilities that they spelled out in their own policies and procedural documents, whether they were doing it for regulatory compliance standards or whatever. So in effect,
completely
they're not meeting their end of the bargain. It would be one way that you're saying it. And so it's sort of logical to think, well, bad them, because they're not doing the things that they should be doing, that they say that they're doing. A question back to you real quick, Priya, is, how does that fit into a legal context, either criminally or civilly, when you say you're doing one thing, you say you have a gate, but it turns out the gate isn't even there, or the gate's off its hinges, or it's leaning against the wall. How does that wrinkle on the law apply?
So there's many circumstances where you can be liable both civilly and criminally. Sometimes a company is pursued both in both forms. A criminal case can only be brought by the government. A civil case can be brought by anybody. So, for example, you have an insider trading case. The feds go after whoever is doing the insider trading, and at the same time, the shareholders bring a derivative suit or bring some kind of action against the board of directors for allowing this. The standards in a criminal case are much higher, the higher standards we have in this country, which is beyond a reasonable doubt, because the penalties are the highest. Civil cases have a much lower penalty. A lower burden of proof, which is preponderance of evidence, which is like a feather on, one part of the scale. That's one of the reasons why, that's two of the reasons why civil cases are brought more often. They're easier to prove, and anybody can bring them. You don't have to convince the government to bring its case and go through all the constitutional hurdles in order to try to convict. And the government rarely goes for someone, they will bring a cannon to shoot a mouse, but they rarely do it unless they think they have the goods. So a civil case is a better avenue for anything that's sort of borderline, or even if it's something that the government thinks like, well, we're going to lose face if we try to do this criminally, so let's just do it civilly. Because we'll lose face because people might not like it, right? They might think like, that's pretty nasty. Why would you do something like that? But your more specific question of, okay, company me, let's say my law firm. I have told my clients in my engagement letter that we keep your data secure, right? And I say, let's say I spell out, we use two-factor authentication. And in fact, we don't, because we're lazy. We can't get our act together. Some people do, some people don't. Most people do sometimes. Everyone does, whatever they feel like on weekends. And because of that, the client's information gets out, right? One of you within 8 seconds hacks into our system, finds our client files, and has sold it to People magazine. We are not going to be criminally liable for that because there's no criminal statute that we have broken. We have a breach of contract. So it's just a civil case there. To reach the level of that kind of behavior, I would have had to do something intentionally. Now let's change the scenario. Everything is the same, but the way that the outside party got the information is I acted intentionally and I sold it to People magazine, right? I sold it to TMZ. Now, potentially, I might have a criminal problem. I'd have to think about it, but just being negligent or breaching the contract is usually highly disfavored for something that a criminal case would flow from, because otherwise you end up, people are people, unfortunately, right? People breach contracts all the time. People, whether it's a written contract, a legal contract, a professional contract, even I'll meet you outside in 10 minutes and you're not there. Like, you breached a contract, right? The people do it all the time. And to criminalize that sort of behavior is sort of what the Van Buren court was avoiding, which is like, you can't criminalize things that dumb, lazy people do all the time. There has to be something more. There has to be, in that case, breaking the gate. In my case, doing something intentionally, not just, I forgot to do it that time. So that's a long answer.
So I'm kind of leaning towards, based on this discussion, why even bother with a criminal statute? It seems like the civil route is much more way to go for all the complexities that you've described in terms of bringing a criminal case, and because we talk about jurisdiction and international boundaries, and it could be anybody in the world. When does this progress from a criminal act to it's and this is stuff that we're debating, in the last couple months. When is it becoming an act of war? Nation state, whether it's a representative of a nation state or simply a citizen of a nation state, but they're doing something against us, the U.S. Why not just declare it an act of war and proceed accordingly? Forget the whole criminal side of things, focus on the civil for the companies that are the victims and go after the international perpetrator as an act of war. It seems like that's a plausible way that we...
How do you classify supply chain attacks such as SolarWind, Jeff, in the scheme of weaponry?
I think it would fall under an act of war based on
No. Sorry. Not in the acts of war, but in the scheme of weaponry. There are tactical weapons. There are strategic weapons. There are weapons of mass destruction. What is a cyber attack?
Oh, and there's another term that I've heard bounced around with this debate, and I'm not thinking. It's not going to come to me right now.
There's a deliberate reason I'm asking it this way.
Well, so answer. I don't have an opinion, and I'm trying to think of the term that I've heard used in terms of weaponry.
It's an asymmetric weapon. Is that what you're thinking of?
That might be what I'm thinking of. That sounds more along the lines of, yeah. But I used to work for an organization that considered the ping command to be a cyber attack. We didn't call it a cyber attack, but it was an active attack.
Could be. It could be. Right.
Well, I think part of what we're talking about now is really the thrust of it. If we want to step back and be, talk about jurisprudence, which is the philosophy of law, right? This government, any government, is only powerful because people buy in, right? They think overall this structure makes sense. I give you power over me. Right? Because otherwise, you could do whatever you want, right? We have a Hobbesian equality, but we've agreed that those 9 people have importance and really impact our daily lives. We've agreed that one person in the White House can do certain things, and that all the other branches get. But we had to have bought in, right? And if you get to a point where there's a criminal statute that's being used to criminalize a 27-year-old intern who's shopping on eBay in the middle of the day on his lunch break, right? But we're not criminalizing what basically are acts of war, right?
Right.
At some point, people stop buying in and they call bullshit. And they say, why should I believe that I should get arrested or have to go through a criminal process for what I did when you're not really, it's hypocrisy, right? This is not a logical extension because this country is under attack and we know who's doing it, and you don't go after them, right? And therefore you're using your resources, your cannons are shooting me, right? Aren't you here to protect me from them? And what are you doing? So I think that's where the conversation has to end up going, right? Which is, what is the purpose of the government at this moment, given the state of cyber attacks, cyber terrorism, cyber capability, right? And I think it's a really complicated, fascinating question that would require, everyone from Biden and whoever his cabal of technology people and policy people are.
I love how you mean the cabal
and people like you to all sit down and figure it out, because it's so complicated.
It is.
Right, but we're forging into new area that hasn't been dealt with before when dealing with these issues, right?
Well, it's not new, but it certainly hasn't been dealt with, I would say.
Not completely, but I don't know that it can ever be dealt with completely. But on the other hand, I think that this is an incredibly valid topic of discussion, in terms of the laws and how do you enact and embody the laws, in terms of understanding the basis for the laws, in terms of understanding the mindset, the audience, the who you're protecting what from. All the different things we've been talking about are absolutely valid questions to ask. I just don't know that they've been answered sufficiently. And I don't know that they ever can be. It has to be an ongoing discussion, and flexibility in the law is enough to accommodate that ongoing discussion.
And the flexibility is all the murkiness that the rest of us complain about, right? We're like, what does this mean? But that's why they implant murkiness, right? Because they know that the minute the ink dries, it's already out of date. And somebody's going to have to use it 5 minutes from now, an hour from now, 5 years from now, to do what they need to do, which we have not contemplated yet. And, I think what we're seeing, given, Russia's just shameless attacks and China and whomever else has attacked us and we don't even know, there's a word in law that I love. It's the word is shibboleth. It's actually just in English, but it's used in law all the time.
Excuse me?
Bless you.
Lollapalooza.
Say it again.
I want to hear
One
what it
more time.
means. Shut up.
Shibboleth, shibboleth, and it means a word without meaning or a concept without meaning. And every now and then, some wonderful Supreme Court justice will say, if we do this, we reduce the law to a mere shibboleth, right? And that's what I'm fearing as I think about cybersecurity issues and our cybersecurity defenses, right? Is this all just a shibboleth, right? Because isn't that what our enemies think? Because they're not stopping. They're not, we threaten, we do this, we do that, but I think it's sort of words without meaning to them. And so for me, the question is, how do we add meaning?
That's a great question, and we should almost end it there, but I won't because it's my show. Everything we're discussing today and the complexities of all of this mess makes me understand, if not appreciate, why the executive order that came out of the White House, back in whenever it was, January, February, March, was so heavy on stuff that, in my opinion, was meaningless in terms of data sharing. That is not a new concept. The idea of data sharing to try to help prevent attacks and breaches, amongst companies within industries is not a new concept. We've talked on this show about the information sharing groups, the ISACs. The Senate passed the bill or put forth the bill in the last week or so to do breach notification within 24 hours. I'm like, yep, because that's the most important thing that happens. I can understand why they put out stuff that's to us sort of, meaningless, trivial, doesn't address the issues, because the issues are really hard. And I think they have political pressure to do something. They got to do something. They got to, the public is screaming for action, and so they
just do something, Jeff, but they have to achieve something, right?
Yeah, well,
they have to get a W on the board, and so go for something that's uncontroversial and secretly meaningless, because then you could say, I got this legislation passed, right? I got a legislation passed that said cats cannot carry lightsabers. Reelect me.
Right. But, maybe we'll just go around the horn. Any final thoughts? We'll save you for last, Priya. Josh, final thoughts.
I find it fascinating that the intentions, that the audience, that all of the different pieces of this jigsaw puzzle around a seemingly simple criminal law, like, okay, they break in, they're criminals. Well, no, not necessarily. I find it fascinating that off of a fairly simple topic, we expanded it. This massive morass. And I love that kind of thing. It's fun to think about all the different ways that you can discuss this.
Scott.
Unfortunately, no matter what is done to deal with cyber, the issue is always going to be a hot topic for debate. There are always going to be new compromises and new ways of doing things. We've seen this with the speed at which cyber has evolved. And unfortunately, it's going to take other facets that are not deeply technically involved, such as the courts, such as legal, such as Congress, such as others, to catch up. And unfortunately, that catch up will be they're replaced by people that have grown up with this, that have lived through all of this and have dealt with it. IT and cyber, more specifically, in the grand scheme of things, I feel are still in their infancy. So trying to say, well, we have something's better than nothing, make progress over perfection, is really what the big key is here. We can sit back and talk about all the legal topics and terms that we want, but if we can't say, well, this group, these people, this thing is liable, are we really doing our job?
Okay. My thought is simply, and it's just an idea, I'm intrigued by the idea of let's throw out the criminal statute altogether and strictly look at cyber as a civil problem, sort of domestically in-house, and as a wartime espionage, act of war type of thing when we're crossing international borders. I might think differently half an hour from now, but that's my current thought. Priya, your thoughts?
So I have two. One is, one of you said that everybody in Congress is a lawyer. Given what we've been discussing, and given what the issues that really matter are, and given that the people who are growing up now are so different than the people who are in office, I'm wondering if we're going to a future where the lawyers are replaced with hackers and computer people, and that's who becomes our legislature, and that's who becomes our president, and that's who becomes the people in charge, because they're the only ones who really know, right? One. And my second thought is, based on what you said, Jeff, and given your background of, why are we not calling this an act of war? My really deep suspicion is because we're not ready for this war. As soon as we say it's a war, then we have to throw down. And I don't think we're ready to throw down.
Interesting. What an amazingly depressing and concerning conversation. But if nothing else, gives me an appreciation for whatever I think of the government, each of the three divisions of government. They certainly have tough issues to tackle. So that's going to wrap for us this week. Priya, thanks so much for catching up with this and letting us have a legally focused discussion. Just as a reminder to our listening audience, we will have no show next week because it's Black Hat DEF CON week. I will be out in Vegas if anybody happens to be there. I'll be around for Black Hat and DEF CON. Hope to see you. Otherwise, we'll be back the week after. And we will take up the discussion again of building bridges and tearing down silos. That's it for Security and Compliance Weekly.